Okay, thank you very much. So in my presentation, this presentation is based on several fieldworks that I have conducted from 1990 until now onwards. And I shall focus on the significance of reindeer pastoralism among Sami people of Finnish Lapland in particular, and on the importance to understand it as a subsistence that somehow reaches beyond the purely economical analysis for a more sort of holistic approach. I shall argue that reindeer herding is deeply embedded in all the different aspects of social and cultural life of the Sami people. And despite somehow its diminished economic importance, is still and nevertheless fundamental for the support of Sami culture and of its principle of sustainability. As you may know, and some of you may know definitely for sure, the Sami people are the only indigenous group in Europe, and so they actually have a special somehow role and a special position in Europe. They live in the northern part of Europe, in this part where we actually live, and their territory, which is called in their language Sámi, it stretches upon the 4 different nation states of the north, starting from Norway to Sweden to Finland to Russia, to particularly the Kola Peninsula. Their number is always challenging because it doesn't have a particular, although the census have been made, but they roughly goes between 75,000 to 100,000, half of which about 45,000 live in Norway, 20,000 in Sweden, just over 9,000 have been growing here in Finland. In the 90s, there were about 6,000. Now they are about 10,000, and about 2,000 in Russia. The Sami language, as you can see from the map, that particular map is actually, it was originally a language map, which is now roughly overlapping with the idea of Sápmi. It's divided into nine different languages, and the northern Sami is the one that it's the most spoken one. To this day, let's say that the Sami subsistence economy is still very much based in the sort of in one of the most crucial concept that it's or principle that I would say that it's crucial to them, and that is the being mixed. In fact, to this day, I mean, it's not a case that actually the Sami were called the people of the 8th season, and it was precisely because of this way of exploiting resources around during the year, in the yearly cycle that they had. Furthermore, in my fieldwork, I've seen that also another important aspect, it's the Sami relation with the landscape, which I found that it's very intimate, and in that sense, validating also the principle that the landscape is very, very important in fashioning people's sense of identity, and also as a repository of their tradition. For the Sami people, the natural world is not understood as standing apart from the domain of human social life, but it's rather understood as a continuation of it. How do I? Yeah. So. This. Sorry, I'm navigating between. So the one of the most important thing that is crucial when we look at Sami and the way actually they have understood, they have developed this sort of way of sustainability, it's also to sort of point out the fact that in fact what they have really done from time immemorial, rather than talking about reindeer herding, the Sami have been attending their relationship with the reindeer as the animal, first through hunting, and then only a little more than 400 years, or around 400 years ago, through herding. Hence, what is really traditional in the Sami way of life is actually the relation with the reindeer, not so much the herding as such. Sami subsistence was originally based very largely on hunting, fishing, and gathering, but it was only later that it became that they started to sort of tame animals. And the first document that actually points to this direction about the taming of draft animals, it only dates back about to the 9th century, and that's Ottar, a Norwegian trader that was giving an account to King Alfred of England. And during this time, they were using, he was mentioning that they were using reindeer for transportation. They started to tame reindeer for transportation, and then also as a decoys for hunting wild reindeer. The existence of this hunting technique is also supported by archaeological excavation, and you can see the pits in the figure in figure 1 that they were using for this hunting. It's only like later on with the use of decoys that they were able to gather more animals, and in the figure number 2 by Knut Lem, we can see a description of how basically through the decoys were collecting these animals, and little by little sort of understood that it was possible also to herd those animals. But the development, however, of small-scale intensive herding became as one of the features of Sami culture only from the 16th century onwards. As a Sami scholar, Lehtola, argues, he says that extensive herding only developed in Finnish Lapland at the beginning of the 17th century. There are many views regarding on the reason why reindeer herding developed from the previous activity of hunting. Among the factors, of course, that influenced this process, we can mention the arrival of the farmers, the need to rely on more sort of predictable sources of income for the payment of taxes and for barter, and then also political changes and the establishment of new state borders, as well as also the decrease in the number of wild reindeers and wild game. So with respect with how do you say with the relationship with the reindeer, I would turn now to the next slide. Sorry, a description is given, a very poignant description actually about the relationship with reindeer as soon as this type of wild livelihood had developed, is actually with a description by Johan Turi, who's a Sami, the first Sami voice that speaks about Sami tradition to outsider from a Sami point of view. And it really sounds like a synthesis of the Sami relation to the animal. And it's, you can see from this quote, "Welcome my herd and take care of it, just like you have done before. Be now, little mother, my friend again, little mother, feed my reindeer well." This is a yoik, and little mother, Sámi Jatnami, or Sami Jatni, how he calls it. It means Sami mother. It's a sort of very important because it shows how the understanding of the Sami about nature, it was like, and it was about as if it was the keeper. Mother Nature was the keeper of the pasture, and it was the one. It was more of Mother Nature was more a friend, a helper, and maybe I would say a midwife, because of the way the reindeer herder were attending only at the pasture, and much of the other work. And this type of relationship, this intense relationship, both with mother herd and the reindeer, is actually has been brought forward to these days, as you can see from the next slide, where you can see the description. This is an extract from some interviews that I was doing, and we were sort of trying to figure out how Sami feel and what do they know and how close they are to the animals. And there was this Sami reindeer herder was giving me quite detailed description, not only of the color of the shaping of the antler and everything, but also about the psychological nature of each animal. And you can see, actually, I drew this kinship diagram to show really how they could actually track kinship as well to the fourth generation, really. And that's really quite telling about this intense relationship. But reindeer herding, it's not only a relationship with nature and with the animals, but it's also a social relation, very important. And here there are the sort of three main, what in my view is the three main concept, and I sort of that somehow swirls around reindeer herding. The Sami traditional cycle was actually based on these three features: the herd, which is called the yellow, the herding group, the sida, and the seasonal migration, which is the johti. The cycle revolved around the community of herders, the reindeer, and the shift between the pasture. The herd was basically the basic unit on which the herder could rely. This term in Sami, in fact, the yellow, is literally means life. It means the herd. It means wealth. It means possession. It's such a inclusive word, and just like the sida, it's also it's even more incorporating, because the sida is not the village, which has a different name. It's called gilli, and refers to settlements, sedentary settlements that had a sort of fixed dwelling place. The sida instead is somehow it incorporates the iellu together with those who tend it, and it's a sort of it cannot be dissolved, the union between the herd and the band of the herders, and so it's like the epitome, in a sense, of the social relations of herding. So that the sida incorporates people, animals, and pasture, and family as well, because it's partly overlapping with kinship as well. However, things did change and across during the history, and we can see that from an original migration pattern that would cover several hundreds of kilometers, very much like, in a sense, what my colleague Professor Stamle will speak later, probably in respect, to nenets, for instance. The Sami used to cover all those distances, but in fact, they came to a halt at some point, and due to the institution of national borders and the historical changes that happens in the north, and to this, basically, what followed, it was the sorry, let's see. It was the birth of the paliskunta, of a system in Finland that apportioned the whole territory where reindeer herding could be practiced, and then created new boundaries, so that basically the way the migration used to be done, they had to be recreated into the smaller apportioned territories of each paliskunta, of each cooperative. And as you can see in the cooperative where I was doing fieldwork, this yearly cycle was recreated, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, within the territory of a national park. So there are also many views regarding the reasons why reindeer herding developed from the previous activity of hunting. And among the factors that influenced this process, we can also mention so the state as a big player. Another important aspect that changed in Sami reindeer herding, it was the SIDA through this particular formation of cooperatives. And so basically, I'll change the slide. There was also a great social change, and the fact that the way kinship had been developed in the north, which was based very much on a sort of bilateral type of kinship, so the taking both from the mother side and the father side, and it was exogamous, so it was actually outward looking. It was like allowing marriages across different sidas. As a matter of fact, it was very much needed alliances to create alliances, and marriage was the best way. But that had to be changed, particularly in Finland, because the creation of the cooperatives and the fact that many sidas had to come together. You can see in the diagram that in this particular cooperative, there were like 5 different sidas. You can see that something that, in a sense, shows resilience and shows sort of cultural and social adaptation to the new setting. It actually, the pattern of kinship went to endogamous and back to exogamous. So it went through a phase of marrying within the communities of the different sidas, until a bigger, and the wide circle, it stands for the bigger cooperative SIDA, until a bigger one was reached, so that then afterwards could be restarted the old system of marrying outside and creating new alliances. So the relationship with the landscape is another one that I wish to touch upon. As I was saying before, there is this was also part of another interview that was done by me, and it was about trying to understand how important movement and how important orientation and how important the relationship with landscape was. And as you can see from the left side, the amount of names actually that came from during this interview, it was so much, but it was like embedded. It was like an episode of narrative in a sense, I thought, and it was a way of re-traveling and re-performing the journey that had been done over and over again. So that basically the way they can move, and in the picture on the right hand side, you can see a normal instance of winter herding with a group where I was working with, and it was in complete snowstorm with nothing, no clue whatsoever of where we were, at least from my point of view. But for them, it was like the knowledge of how the terrain was actually unfolding below the snowmobile. They could actually follow, as if it was like with a GPS. They could actually follow the precise spot where they were and where to stop and so on. And so the reason why actually then we stopped and then we returned back home, it was because of the visibility, that they couldn't see the reindeer, not really because they wouldn't know where they were. So here is again another example of intimacy of the practitioners, the reindeer herders, and the land. And here is a bit of a sort of synthesis of that, and how through this reenactment of journeys, actually, these patterns of movement were actually made available also to others, along with a list of different names. And the list of names would only occur only through these reenacted journeys. And also about the concept of home, it was another part that I thought it was very important, and the fact that they could claim that the home is there, right there in the forest, and it was really like quite clearly the sort of enfolding of the space through the setting up of a temporary teepee, and the putting up of the fire that would bring everything under a focus, literal focus of their attention. So the changes that have occurred throughout reindeer herding, they can be summed up by this slide, and basically we can see that there is almost like a move in sort of a move back to the original state when the situation was like when livelihood was more on the hunting side nowadays, because through from hunting moving through pastoralism, the pastoralism, it really implied a very intense relationship with the herd, and moving together with the herd. We are now at the stage where of course the reindeer herders are all settled and in villages and so on, and therefore the distance has increased, but the distance to reach is covered with new technologies. So in that sense, shortening again. I'll just go very quickly through this cycle, which is like a way of maximizing, if we want, the resources available through the whole yearly cycle of the reindeer. They basically start with a summer, with a month of the calves, which is the Miestemanno in May, and the livelihood sort of unfolds through from that onwards through these phases: the summer calving and marking, which is like when comparison and assigning property happens, which is like when the calves are tagged and then assigned to each single mother reindeer, and through by reading the ear mark. Interestingly enough, this thing actually wasn't. This is clearly an adaptation to a new condition, and to actually the existence of the cooperatives, to the institution of the cooperatives. It wasn't such. I mean, when they were moving with the herd, usually the marking was done as the reindeer were giving birth, and then it wasn't really so much important, the ear mark, as much as it is now, because now they are all herded together as a group activity. Therefore, the ear mark need to be quite clear, and they take into consideration, of course, the mistakes, and that's why the comparison is done. They sit around a tree, like you can see, and they call each number of the tag, and then the property is actually assessed. If only one name comes out and someone says, it's my reindeer, that one, that little one, then is assigned to the person. If not, if two owners shout the same number, therefore then they go and check. So they find the owner. Once the owner is found, then you can finally grab and untag calves, and then you can write your earmark as the young man is doing on the right hand side on the reindeer. The next phase is the winter herding, and basically it's to manage basically the pasture. It's most of it. It's like to check where the reindeer are, managing the pasture so that they actually have enough to eat, and then the separation is the moment when the reindeer are brought back to the corral for the slaughter season. Here again, the traditional winter slaughter is something of a different type compared to the modern one. You can see in the upper part the normal traditional winter slaughter completely embedded into the social fabric of the Sida, where children go and see and participate, and the hides of the reindeer are put aside for future use of garments and clothing, whereas you can see below something that sounds very much of a comparison as with forestry, where the reindeer are stuck inside this slaughterhouse and ready for the consumer to use them, and just like you can see on the right, the trees. So the alienation that is actually happening between one case and the other, between the social embedded slaughter and alienation, it's quite clearly something that doesn't point at sustainability as such, and at least at the cultural and social sustainability, because knowledge is being produced and reproduced in the upper part through the participation of the whole group and not of single people. One other major threat to sustainability has been experienced by the Sami reindeer herders because of compulsory, what has become almost a necessity, and that is the winter feeding, the spring, late spring feeding. And that's something that it wasn't the case before because of the climatic condition. I mean, in the 90s, I did my first fieldworks in the 90s, and I remember it was very much different. The type of snow, the type of work plans that the reindeer herders were doing, in where to go and how and which routes they would take. I think already in the 97, which was the first time I participated to an emergency feeding, it was because of the icing. Basically what happens is, like with the temperatures going up and down very quickly, and that in periods of the year where of the season, of the winter season, they are completely unexpected, like January, February, like now. What happens is, like through the amount of snow, it forms different layers of ice, which then the reindeer is not able to break through during the sort of digging process when it moves around for feeding and breaks and goes down all the way down through the snow to search for lichens. And so when in 97, what happened, it was like quite a few thousand animals were lost, and we had to take those hay bales to the mountains where the reindeer were at the time, where normally they would have eaten lichens, and they couldn't. And so if we think about climate change as a threat, it's definitely one of them. And so not only in social, but also in real terms and threatening directly the herd. But the point is, it's also threatening, culturally speaking, and biologically speaking, the animals, because the reindeer have been changing because of that. And the reindeer herders where I was working, they didn't really like that. They didn't like the fact that the reindeer are becoming somehow more domesticated and more keen on and prone on waiting for extra feeding rather than going themselves and search for that. I mean, one of them sort of most pride was taken by reindeer herder. He was to actually say that my herd is actually really wild, in a sense that it was able to look after itself. Now, to sum up a little bit the stages of development of the Sami reindeer herding, we can see that the first part of it is actually very much hunting until the between 16th and 18th century, where finally they start to gather reindeer and herd them. Then the changes that have been happening afterwards is actually been more about increasing the velocity, the speed with which they were able to reach the herds, and particularly in the Finnish case through the cooperatives. What we actually face nowadays is actually more a phase in which is still extensive as a reindeer herding type, but it's becoming more and more remote, and particularly with the use of GPS and Google Maps and drones. It's on the one hand trying to be more sustainable, because it's possible to do less trips to the places where the reindeers are, and less trips to actually look for them. And it's still like it feels like, you know, that the relationship is becoming weaker, and that's what they are mostly afraid. On the other hand, to actually put a GPS collar, it actually needs a lot of knowledge about the type of reindeer. I mean, if you remember when I was mentioning those three reindeers and the description and how the reindeer herder was talking about some of them as leaders and some of them not really as leaders, and so on. And so you actually want to put the GPS collar onto a leader so that you know where all the rest of the herd is actually moving. So that skills and knowledge is still there. And then the knowledge of the landscape and the places where the reindeer are grazing is still hugely important in the choices that you make. But in terms of physicality between the reindeer herders and reindeer, this remoteness is actually quite felt. Now, one more aspect of this, it's this relation with the forest. It's also came through to me through another project that was called Powers Technology Production of Space. And it was about this conflict over overlapping resources and the need for the aim and for sustainability. The case was particularly in a village of the northeastern part of Finland, where we went to look, and it was like there were some reindeer herders who were wanted to use certain parts of the forest as grazing land, and the institution that was harvesting the forest there was seeing as trees and forest as commercial forest, and here you can actually see the different understanding of these nature values that because just for an example of in the ads that I show there, the idea that someone can see the forest for the trees, it really sounds very much that the forest has a different use value compared to what the reindeer herders were doing. And in fact, what the reindeer herder is doing with the help of a green activist, a Greenpeace activist, it was like to say, this is not a commercial forest as you actually depict in the map, where everything is highly structured and all the resources are already allocated and apportioned. But this is grazing land, and it's a particularly important grazing land because of a particular type of food that you can find here that you cannot find elsewhere. So in this sense, the different understanding of the different actors that are operating on the same grazing land where Sami reindeer herders are operating, it is somehow undermining the very idea of sustainability. And particularly in this forest conflict in Nellin, what came to me, it was the heavy use of maps and the fact that everyone was writing on this map, where the reindeer herders were describing me on the top picture, where the reindeer were, how they were moving, what type of grazing land is that particular part, and so on. On the other hand, as we saw in the previous map, everything had already been apportioned, and so somehow it was already decided what the use of that particular forest. What is it? It's really like, so all those lines can be drawn and redrawn on maps, but as a friend and colleague of mine, Timo Kumpula from the University of Eastern Finland once sent me a map because we were having a discussion about this thing, and he said, oh, I have actually something for you. And he showed me these two pictures taken, one in 1979 and the other one in 2005, of the same area in the same region, in this particularly in this area where the conflict was. And it shows really the increase of forest growth. It's really like amazing. But the point is that forest growth, what they do to reindeer herding is a crucial impact, because what the reindeer can then finally, the amount of distances that can be covered in already existing roads network, like the forest road, is so huge that the reindeer herders are not anymore able to forecast where are they moving, nor are they able to control the movement of the herd as such, that they are completely unpredictable. And then, of course, let alone the amount of grazing land that actually is lost through that particular process. So yeah, so with this, I think I'm quite done. I would like to maybe, like I had put down some conclusion. What is important is to emphasize that traditional Sami subsistence has never been based on one particular activity, but has spanned according to the season, from hunting to fishing to gathering and to herding. Since the Sami approach to the use of natural resources has been the holistic attitude of incorporating the various elements of the relation with the environment, both in economic and cultural ways. Political and border changes have also brought, as we have seen, changes in the patterns of migration, particularly with respect to the Finnish case. And as I have shown from the maps, early migration patterns between Finland and the coast were brought to an end with the introduction of the reindeer herding cooperatives, and so we have seen how those patterns have been recreated. Similarly, also there have been changes with the CEDA. So what actually takes is that what the reindeer herders had to do, they had been asked to become more and more flexible, but the flexibility, at least in the terms that was suggested by Stamler and Beach, has become minimal due to the increased necessity that reindeer herders find to have to rationalize. In fact, at the reindeer herd separation that I have been, whereas the Sami in the past, the Sami herders used to separate reindeer according to the principle of which animal has the best chance of survival over winter, judged by condition of its teeth and so on, and whether it has fat. Nowadays, they are compelled to adopt an official rationalizing principle for the herding cooperative that is dictated by usually the Ministry of Agriculture, and that is based on the carrying capacity of on the number of the reindeer population over the carrying capacity of its pasture, and so any increase in this or decrease, it will impact heavily all the other natural repercussion on the other factors. So the natural way, as the reindeer herders used to describe it, it was that in the older times, if reindeer were too many, then the reindeer men, no matter how skillful they were, they would not be able to keep the herd together. And so some of the reindeer would have gone astray, or like they were saying, they would have gone back to nature, or they would have joined wild herd at the time when there were wild herds, or simply they would have become so weak that they would have become then prey to wild animals. The imposition of stringent slaughter percentages indexes has actually the effect of limiting and mortifying the herder's judgment and the principle on how to make a choice when confronting the reindeer during the separation in the corral. Hence, instead of seeing a calf, a miesi, like they say, or chairman, as a calf, they must see it as a head and take decision accordingly. Nowadays, the Sami people may have only few reindeer, but they keep them because they regard them as important for their identity and for their language. And they are regarded by all the generation as a fundamental strategy in order to bridge the modern Sami society to its traditional values. More and more herders recognize the importance of Sami culture to keep its connection to reindeer herding alive. And this is why herders have increasingly defined the reindeer herding subsistence not just as an economic activity, but also as a cultural one. Hence, in order to understand the resilience of herders who stay in a subsistence that may be seen as marginal or not as a full activity, or at times also as a low profit activity, one could then answer this question as another reindeer herder told me once, that reindeer herding is a way of living and not a way to make a living. And in this is encapsulating the very nature of the Sami worldview. And I think maybe I can finish here.